Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are turning now to a little poem called Gods. By the way, notice the plural and not the singular. Gods, poem number 4 of the 29 of the collection that we call By the Roads, that Whitman called By the Roadside. Now our assumptions here are that you've been with us at learnstrong.net from the very beginning. Through inscriptions, we gave a set of introductory comments to By the Roadside, and then we just finished with Mirror, and now we turn to this little poem. Believe it or not, this is one of those poems very rarely spoken of in Leaves of Grass, and yet it is a controversial poem for a number of reasons. We'll try and get to it. Let's begin with our Nortons to just hear some background information. When this poem first published, it was in Passage to India of 1871, and again in 1876. It opened with 2 lines dropped in the present 1881 version. Thought of the, here are the lines, thought of the infinite, the all, be thou my God. Also dropped was an invocation to the old cause in the 5th stanza. Now, we talk in our introductory set of comments about the 5 P's of Whitman as we are looking at it. Whitman is person, Whitman is poet, Whitman is teacher or pedagogue, Whitman is politician, his love of democracy, and finally, Whitman is philosopher. But notice we don't really comment, other than Whitman as philosopher, we don't really comment about Whitman as a theologian. Some of you have said, well, you could have had a 6th P, Whitman as prophet. And there's no question that theologian or prophet is one of the hats that Whitman liked to wear. When we look at this poem, we'll ask about Whitman's views on worship and reverence. And in fact, I'm a believer that this poem kind of helps us to stumble onto 1 or 2 really key ideas that we'll discover in Leaves of Grass. By the way, the word gods, you'll remember in God. You'll remember Song of Myself, passage 41, the gods of the antique wars. And then in passage 48 of Song of Myself, why should I wish to see God better than this day I see something of God, blah, 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 blah. So this is not unusual that he is referencing now gods. Let's enjoy the poem now, and let's try and figure out why this poem is a somewhat radical poem, certainly for when it was published. Lover divine and perfect comrade, waiting, content, invisible yet, but certain, be thou my God. Thou the ideal man, fair, able, beautiful, content and loving, complete in body and dilate in spirit, be thou my God. O death, for life has served its turn, opener and usher to the heavenly mansion, be thou my God. Aught of mightiest, best I see, conceive or know, to break the stagnant tie, thee to free, O soul, be thou my God. All other ideas, the race's aspirations, all heroisms, deeds of rapt enthusiasts, be ye my gods, or time and space, or shape of earth divine and wondrous, or some fair shape I viewing worship, or lustrous orb of sun or star by night, be ye my gods. Now, this little poem, we'll notice, change the refrain, and again it starts to sound almost like a song with chorus, from be thou my God to be ye my gods, and we'll obviously have to ask about what's up with that. Notice we begin, first of all, with the word lover, which already makes this an interesting poem. Lover, but then the word divine. And perfect, comrade, capitalized, makes us think, of course, of Camarero, song the Open wrote it elsewhere. Waiting, content, invisible yet, but certain. This idea, as we've talked about it before with Plato's Republic and the theory of the forms, the idea of the 2 boxes, the physical box, the second, the metaphysical box. And then he'll say it, be thou my God. In other words, my lover is my God. And there's any number of ways to try and understand this. By the way, notice the word perfect that gets used later will be ideal. Makes us immediately think of Plato's Republic and the ideal state, the ideal republic as being created. Thou, back to this more religious word. Thou, double twice. The ideal man. By the way, this is the only time in all of Leaves of Grass that this phrase gets used, the ideal man. Obviously, we're thinking of Plato's Republic when we read a line like this. Fair. Notice we got several now things to be said about the ideal man. Fair, probably here mostly meaning beautiful, as in beautifully constructed. Able meaning competent. Beautiful, obviously, self-evident. Content is an interesting one. It's almost as if in Leaves of Grass, Whitman is constantly trying to come to terms and to be content with the way that the world is, while at the same time obviously challenging the world to become better or improved. And then we're back to the first word of the poem in the word loving. Complete in body and dilate in spirit. You'll remember this word dilate. For him I sing, dilated fuse, right? Go back and take a look at how we played with it there. Be thou my God. So in other words, the ideal. So notice we go from the perfect companion to the ideal man. And then the third stanza, O death, and then notice in parenthetics, for life has served its turn. Immediately we think of Song of Myself, passage 6, when we come to a line like this. Opener and usher to the heavenly mansion. By the way, heavenly mansion is only used one time in Leaves of Grass, and the phrase is right here. Of course, we're thinking John 14:2 from the Gospels. In my Father's house are many mansions and all of that. Be thou my God one more time. In other words, notice we go from the perfect comrade to the ideal man to now the celebration of death itself. Then the word ought stacked twice, just like thou was stacked in the second stanza. Ought of mightiest, best. We're back to the ideal. We're back to the perfect. Best I see, conceive, or know. And then parenthetics. To break the stagnant tie. It's an interesting idea about this use of the word stagnant. Go back and really pay attention to the way in which the idea of stagnant versus growth, stasis versus some kind of notion of evolution, has been with us all the time when we're reading in Leaves of Grass. To break the stagnant tie, and then again, stacking of two words, same word. Thee to free, and now we're back to it with O soul. And again, this takes us back to Song of Myself, obviously passages 3 and 5, the idea of directly addressing the soul. And then finally, one more time for the fourth time, Be thou my God. It's interesting because the title of the poem is Gods, which we're going to come to. But notice here, it's in the singular as we began with the first four stanzas. Now, to get to the fifth and the sixth stanzas, notice the repetition of the word all in the next two lines, and then the repetition of the word or. All great ideas. And immediately we'll tip our hats, of course, to Mortimer Adler and his gang at Britannica and the rest of them out of the U of Chicago that decided to play around with the idea of the great ideas as it came out of the great books. All great ideas. The race's aspirations, and of course aspirations is significant in our study of Leaves of Grass. All heroisms, deeds of rapt enthusiasts. We can think, of course, about his celebration of heroism. Obviously, the idea of being rapt. It's such a religious term in terms of awe, in terms of worship. We're going to get to worship in a little bit. And then finally, it's be ye my God. So we're going to have to ask, why do we go from be thou to be ye? And why do we go from God to gods? That is to say, these ideas. I think the heart of all of this is the question of Leaves of Grass we're now about to come to. And I think there's a way to read Leaves of Grass with this idea in mind, and it is simply this. What is really the thing or things that you decide to worship, and then why, right? The awe, the reverence that's a part of it. Notice he says, or time and space, obviously Song of Myself, passage 46, I know I have the best of time and space. It's a phrase that he's used a few times already. Or shape of earth divine, we're back to the second word of the poem in the word divine. And wondrous. Of course, he loves this word wonder and wondrous. He plays with it all the way through Leaves of Grass. Or some fair shape. Of course, we're back to the word fair in the second stanza, right? Fair shape. Of course, to hear the word fair shape immediately makes us think of Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn. Eye, viewing, and then finally we get to the key word of the poem, worship. I think, remember starting from Almanac passage number 7, when he uses this word, adored or worshipped for the very first time in Leaves of Grass. Or lustrous orb of sun. You'll remember the word lustrous gets used on the beach at night. Lustrous orb of sun or star by night. And then finally, be ye my gods. Now what are we going to do with a poem like this? Well, I think that Whitman is pointing out something fundamental about Leaves of Grass. Great ideas are always worthy of respect, worship, awe. And in the end, we are defined by what we decide to worship. I think this is the point that Whitman is making. However, for his day, this is pretty radical because there was an understanding that the word worship was reserved for religious experience, especially, of course, religious experience that was contained within a certain kind of house of worship or whatever. Clearly, Whitman is expanding the definition of what he's going to think of as worthy, can we say, theology, worthy reverence, respect, worship. At 2b, I love the repetition. I love this moving from God to gods, and of course tying back into the title itself. And again, it does kind of play out like a song. At 3a, what can we compare this to? Well, I like to think of course, Emerson's classic essay, Nature. Just go back to our comments at learnstrong.net specific on that essay, and then come back and read this poem, and you'll see that there's a lot of Emersonian influence, I think, in a poem like this. I want to throw out, though, Dante's Divine Comedy. I think Whitman was very influenced by Dante and Milton, no question. And I think both Dante and Milton, of course in Paradise Lost, especially for Milton, is this question of what is worthy of worship, what is worthy of respect, what is worthy of awe. And then finally, how are we going to own a poem like this? It's pretty self-evident where you know we're headed with this one. It's a simple question. If we're defined by what we worship, then what is it that we worship? And then more particularly, why? What is it that Whitman worships and why? I think reading Leaves of Grass from this perspective is a fun way to do it. We move on now to poem 5 and Germs. Thank you.